Good morning. I'm Nancy Gonlin of Bellevue College in Washington State, USA. Today I present on urban nightscapes of the classic Maya. There are 7 main sections to my presentation. First, a very short introduction. I'll talk about the case study of the late classic Maya to provide some background information. A little bit about theoretical orientations and Mesoamerican philosophy on night and darkness. And then I'll delve into the classic Maya city from a nocturnal perspective and tie that in with inequality before I conclude my presentation. We humans did not always live in crowded, congested conditions that we so favor today. More of us live in cities now than any other type of community for the very first time in our history. We may now call ourselves Homo sapiens urbicus, or city human. The urban experience is a phenomenon that humans created beginning about 5,000 years ago, but we have faced the night for eons. This world map displays the areas of early complex societies symbolized by pyramids where cities rose, some of them thousands of years ago. Archaeology is uniquely suited to answer long-term questions of urban adaptation, and in particular, how humans coped with nocturnal dimensions of city life, especially dark city nights. The very mention of the word city evokes our senses. The sights, sounds, smells, feel, and taste of urban life predominate. A city in the dark at night arouses its own sensations and creates a unique nocturnal landscape or urban nightscape. Envision urban life without electricity, and we can begin to sense what it was like to live in an ancient city after the sunset. To illustrate major points, I present material from a well-known and well-studied ancient civilization of the Americas, the late classic lowland Mayas of Mexico and Central America. The ancient Mayas formed a part of a culture area that archaeologists refer to as Mesoamerica. It encompasses the modern countries of central and southern Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, western Honduras, and the Pacific coasts of El Salvador and Nicaragua. Mesoamerica encompassed many other urban peoples whose ancestors have been extensively researched, such as the Central Mexican Aztecs in their capital, Tenochtitlan. The case study of the classic Maya. Maya groups inhabited southern and central Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador for thousands of years. The late classic Mayas flourished from AD 600 to 900 and built independent kingdoms in the low-lying tropical areas, as evidenced by the remains of soaring temples, grand plazas, elaborate tombs, palatial residences, roads, reservoirs, and residential areas that we would call suburbs. The deep meanings of classic Maya nights arise from abundant archaeological data that are strengthened through judicious use of iconographic, epigraphic, ethnohistoric, and ethnographic data. While major forces of colonialism and racism have altered lifeways, the Maya peoples of today, some 6 million strong, show resilience and persistence. Some practices have transcended time. The Maya create an enduring culture that thrived as much during the day as it did during the night. Theoretical orientations on ancient nights. There's not just one best theoretical orientation for illuminating ancient nights. Commonly used in archaeological study of the night are theoretical perspectives emanating from Pierre Bourdieu's practice theory, agency theory, environment behavior studies following architect Amos Rappaport, sensory archaeology, cultural astronomy, cultural and historical ecology, and nighttime household archaeology, my own creation. Jacques Galinier and his French colleagues and Burkhard Schneppel and Ayel Ben Ari are some of the anthropologists who have been at the forefront for pushing the incorporation of the night as an essential element in anthropological research. I have taken this call seriously with the publication of 3 co-edited volumes on the archaeology of the night. 4. Mesoamerican philosophy, night and darkness. Numerous ancient Mesoamerican peoples conceived of darkness as the ominous time before creation, full of uncertainty, awe, and apprehension. The duality of Mesoamerican philosophy pervaded the natural cycle of the Earth's rotation, lending distinct characteristics to daylight and darkness. Classic Mayan glyphs assist us in further understanding this duality. The concept of tz'ak represents an abstraction that connotes a single whole, as in day and night completing a diurnal cycle. One part, night, inevitably comes before the other, but only when the two are joined is order achieved, completeness reached, and the world is whole. 5. The classic Maya city, a nocturnal perspective. Though the Maya-built environment was tied to cosmology, how urban areas were used at night has not been considered in depth. Classic Maya cities included most of these types of architecture and infrastructure, Eastern groups, or E-groups for short, temples and ancestor shrines, plazas, roads, royal palaces, residential areas, dance platforms, observatories, ball courts, workshops, schools, monoliths, and government buildings. Below, I discuss a few of these features in relation to the night. A knowledge of astronomy comprised part of the select education of elites. The earliest widespread public architecture among the lowland Maya was the Eastern group, or the E group, a configuration of structures that dates to at least 1000 BC, built to track the sun. Typically, quote, a raised platform, Eastern platform, that supported 3 structures and faced one Western pyramid across a public plaza, end quote, was built to mark the solstices and zenith passages. But Eastern groups were also connected to the birthplace of the sun and the moon. They served as observatories for naked eye astronomy. Ceremonies carried out here were for agriculture, astronomy, and ancestors. Offerings cached away linked to the 9 lords of the night who ruled Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Apart from shrines included as part of Eastern groups, numerous temples were constructed in Maya cities, and one of the most famous was the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, Mexico. Here, one of the longest-lived rulers, Ahau Kinich Janab Pakal II, known as King Pakal, was laid to rest in 683 after his initial ascent to the throne in 615 at the age of 12. This strong, powerful ruler, even after his death, held sway in his kingdom. Nighttime was the ideal time to commune with ancestors, so we can easily surmise that priests performed the appropriate rituals to appease the departed, honor the dynasty, and comfort the living. The perpetual darkness of entombment was an eternal night. Throughout the Maya lowlands, the courtyard was an essential feature of the smallest to the largest house compounds to urban zones. These open city spaces were used for, quote, private rituals, periodic markets, mass spectator rituals, participatory public ceremonies, and feasts and other popular celebrations, end quote. Such airy squares were ideal for stargazing and dancing until dawn. Part of the infrastructure of a Maya city consisted of a formal road, or sakbe is plural, which means white ways, that connected major areas of a city. Transportation and processions at night were made easier by promenading along the sakbe. Its raised white surface enabled pedestrians to navigate in the night without losing one's way, and safe passage was ensured by remaining on the path in practice and metaphorically. Palaces were scenes of daily and nightly life. Apart from the obvious activity of sleep and sex, numerous events ensued during the dark hours. A throne room constructed within the royal house was a proper place for entertaining and governing. Rulers received tribute as vassals humbled themselves before them. Such activities were recorded in clay, and on this particular vase, quote, "It is nighttime as cued by torches, a palace marked by swag curtains sets the scene," end quote. Adjacent to a government building at Copan, known as the Council House, is a dance platform, structure 25. Decorating the platform are jaguars, crepuscular creatures that are in dance pose. One can imagine that a day of deliberations may have continued into the dark hours, and after successful outcomes, celebrations ensued. Texts carved on a panel from the city of Piedras Negras record its king performing at midnight a descending macaw dance for which viewers were rewarded with a feast afterward, including hot, inebriating chocolate beverages. Politics involved warring city-states whose battles, victories, and losses were famously etched in stone and painted on walls. Kings effectively utilized the element of surprise by staging some warfare under cover of darkness. A nighttime battle is vividly pictured in murals that have survived since the 700s at the small Maya city of Bonampak in Chiapas, Mexico. Led by King Chan Muan, he and his sons emerge victorious with enemy captives. Section 6, Ancient Inequality. Essential activities persisted through the night as it was simultaneously the domain of the servant and the served, each having unique contributions to society. Drudgery and duty prevailed as it did during daylight hours, with royalty performing their tasks to ensure the perpetuation of the polity with their many rituals, and followers attending to indispensable activities of cooking, cleaning, childcare, and cultivation. Nocturnal rhythms of night work and night life populated the classic Maya cities with the sight, sounds, and smells unique to the dark that emerged from houses, whether humble or huge. Domestic disparities were experienced day and night. Urban differences were further highlighted in the performance of nocturnal culture, such as how opulently one communed with the dead. A small household altar of perishable materials functioned equally well as an elaborate temple for honoring one's ancestors, but the prominence of the royals was unmistakable. Bloodletting, a common form of auto-sacrifice in numerous Mesoamerican religions, was a practice that pervaded society. Graphically portrayed in this lintel from the Mexican city of Yaxchilan, Lady Shook passes a thorn-lined throat through her tongue. Blood is caught on paper and burned as an offering. Her husband, King Itzamna Balam, holds a torch to illuminate her in this act of piety. The year is 709, and on Sunday, October 24th, the waxing gibbous moon may have provided additional lighting to this nocturnal sacrament. Evidence for bloodletting has been found on obsidian blades recovered from household contexts in an ancient farming community in El Salvador called Hoya de Seren, reinforcing that this ceremony was integral to all in society. Conclusions. This case study contributes to an archaeology and anthropology of the night and broadens the study of urban nights through comparative social science, augmenting our knowledge of the human condition. The contrasts between the city life of commoners and royalty are illuminating and reflective of inequalities that today exist between different classes in society. Socioeconomic parameters of the night pervaded all aspects of culture. The analysis of remains of households of all statuses inform us about diversity in the experiences of the night. Residents of a classic Maya city were busy at night. They engaged in astronomy, honoring ancestors, dancing, feasting, making love in war, worshiping, promenading, receiving visitors from near and far, some bearing exotic gifts, singing and talking the night away. The cacophony of noises and sounds of the city permeated and enlivened the dark. The overabundance of nocturnal lighting is robbing us modern humans of the sanctity of the darkness. What is considered normal for the night has changed radically through time. Most archaeologists may not consider what it was like to experience an ancient city at night in the dark, and hence have not incorporated this essential element into their research. Just as nocturnal darkness and the solemnity of modern nights are disappearing, so too is the archaeological evidence for ancient nights. Looting remains the primary cause of the loss of information about the past. This dark endeavor should be demonized. As we strive to restore darkness in the night, we should strive to save the past for our future, so that we may understand how people thrived during the day and the night. Archaeology has much to offer for understanding urban nights. At this point in our history on this planet, not only can we call ourselves Homo sapiens urbicus, but also we have earned the moniker of Homo sapiens nocturnus, for we have evolved into the only nocturnal ape. Whether this adaptation is a sustainable one remains to be seen. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Many thanks are due to Dr. Manuel Garcia Ruiz for organizing this conference, Dr. Kay Viswanathan for support and edits on this paper, Dr. David Reed for obtaining critical research materials, Dr. April Noel for looking out for me, and to numerous archaeologists who generously permitted use of these materials.
My project, so this is my PhD project. I submitted 2 weeks ago, so I feel like I have a lot to say and also nothing to say, and I was really struggling actually on preparing for today. So do you see this? No, not yet. Can you see my presentation? No.
No, not yet.
No?
No. Now it's showing.
Yeah?
Yes, yes.
So I'm just gonna start. Sydney and I drive through Nairobi in his car tonight. He does this all the time. He works on the preparations for his business until late in the evening. Sydney increasingly takes such nightly rides, which take him and sometimes both of us into the most diverse parts of Nairobi. Sometimes we just drive around slowly. Sometimes we get out to explore places on foot or talk to people. As we drive past one of the many streets with bars and cut shops in Nairobi West, we decide to park and get out. He suggests sitting somewhere and observe people, something he enjoys as much as I do. I am soaking it all in. The air, the sounds, the lights, the smell of these yummy roasted chickens, even the stupid comments from the guy over there. Just everything, he says. Since Sydney has mentioned to me so many times how special the night is, I ask him to describe it for me. The atmosphere, this very special atmosphere you can feel at night, like a mix of being chilled out with some drops of excitement, fear, and recklessness. That is the very special atmosphere of the night. I'm not so sure whether, I don't think my presentation is moving, right?
No, it freezed.
Ah, well.
Okay, I think now.
Exactly, now. So, yeah, night is in the air. Like clouds in the sky, atmospheres are ever forming and reforming, appearing and disappearing, never finished or addressed. We can't touch atmospheres. Somehow they are in the air and they touch us. Atmosphere is a common term. It is usually used in everyday life without further questioning. One speaks of the cheerful atmosphere of a celebration or of the tense atmosphere of a discussion. Sydney mentions the very special atmosphere of the night, but what is he referring to exactly? Yeah, so this slide is basically my thesis in a nutshell. So what I did was, in my conceptual framework, I was asking myself, what is an atmosphere, or what are atmospheres? In my methodology, I'm discussing the questions how we can actually empirically capture atmospheres, and I would say like the most important part is my ethnography, where I'm dealing with nocturnal atmospheres in Nairobi, how they are perceived, how people discuss them, which factors influence them, and how they are constructed, produced, and then received. And Obviously, there's not one atmosphere, but many. And on the next slide, you can see the collection of nocturnal atmospheres I'm describing in my work. And I'm already, oh, I need to let people in, I think. And I'm already sorry for the quality of this mind map. And I realized that I also didn't like translate the middle part. So I have 20 something different nocturnal atmospheres in my ethnography, and somehow my slides are not moving. Oh God, I wanted to do this like automatically, but apparently that is not working so well.
It happens.
Yes, I don't know. So I'm just
Maybe if you check and
yeah. So I don't really
try to do it again. I don't know. I'm not really an expert, as you all could see.
No, it's supposed to like just move, but it's not.
Can you shut it down and
Yeah.
do it again?
Yes, maybe I'll just do it like manually. Okay, so now again. Here, okay. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Yeah, so these are the atmospheres I'm working with in my ethnography, and then I basically collected them. I have empirical examples for each of them, and then I grouped them so that they have like certain similarities. For example, then intimate, erotic, sexy, and private is like one group, and then afterwards I'm discussing topics regarding the night which are linked to these atmospheres, for example, gender relations, work, 24-hour economy, urbanization, and things like that. So today I want to introduce my concept of atmosphere. And I propose to define atmosphere as a tuned space, which consists of three aspects: one's own subjective mood, the external realities, as well as the social cultural context. And I'm going to say a few words to each of these aspects. The subjective mood includes attuning yourself to the night. It is about making yourself receptive to certain nocturnal atmospheres, whether by preparing for a night shift or creating an inner counterworld to the stressful day to feel free and let go of daily worries and obligations. The subjective mood is always shaped by previous experiences in life. Nocturnal atmospheres have the power to manifest or change the inner subjective mood. The external realities include those that are predetermined by nature, weather and climate, but also factors such as light and darkness. Furthermore, it includes sound and smell, architecture, infrastructure such as means of transport, roads, clothing, and the habitus of people, rhythms of movement. And the last point is an important point for the creation and perception of atmospheres and nocturnal atmospheres is the social cultural context. On the one hand, the one people grew up in, my research participants, but also myself, because it determines how we learn, experience, and create atmospheres. They make sense to us because we have already experienced atmospheres in certain places or moments. They are actually culturally shaped. On the other hand, one must consider another dimension of the social cultural context, namely that of the research location Nairobi. This includes aspects such as ethnicity and habitus as markers of belonging and exclusion, but also the dynamics of the urban space of a cosmopolitan African city. And I'm not really saying anything about Nairobi as a city because of the lack of time, but we can discuss this like later on. So an ethnography of nocturnal atmospheres, which is my goal in my thesis, needs to include the three aspects of the atmosphere concept in order to make them narratable. Through participant observation and conversation with my research participants, I illustrate their inner moods. By describing their and my nocturnal sensual experiences, I can grasp the external realities, and at last, with photographs and thick descriptions of the moments, spaces, situations, and people, I am able to invite the audience into the social cultural context where these nocturnal atmospheres were experienced. I argue that on an empirical level, writing about atmospheres is made possible by thick descriptions and allows for a more nuanced understanding of the night. So now I'm going to read for you one of the descriptions I'm using in my thesis, and I hope I can somehow transport you into the Nairobi night. And it is basically an example of how I would get myself into the mood of exploring Nairobi's nocturnal atmosphere, because this idea of getting in the mood is very important. And yeah, I think it's not very unusual for an anthropologist to give a long empirical example, but I think it's unusual that I'm going to be the main character, or I'm actually going to be the only character in this scenario, but I will explain in the end why I chose this. And yeah, I wanted to do this automatically because I have quite a few photographs. So yeah, I'll just try and do that manually. Okay, and the example is called Day and Night Merge into Each Other. With a queasy feeling, I get out of Brian's car on River Road, where he drops me off. It has become dark a while ago. Immediately, I'm pulled into the wake of the city, which seems to be waking up again or just now. An army of people is still or already back on the streets at different speeds on their way to destinations unknown to me. They comb the streets, some walking so fast that I can hardly see them. Others seem not to be in a hurry and are just strolling around. I have to concentrate on not stumbling, not standing in the way, and if necessary, avoid those who pursue their goal with a fixed gaze and quick step. There's no time to stand still for even a second. Matatus, that are Kenyan minibuses, wind their way through the traffic, rushing off with a roaring engine, braking loudly again a few meters further on, and stopping to get more passengers on. The whistling and screaming touts, they're kind of like advertising these matatus, contribute with their calls and announcement to the noise. One can't hear one's own voice. Paired with the usual honking, booming bass, and the latest music, howling engines, and the whining of pedestrians, it is a wild mess. Loud, chaotic, busy, and full of life. This has nothing to do with the calm and relaxed heralding of the evening and the night. I turn right to get onto a road which is known for being busy around the clock. This area has the reputation of being a very safe corner in Nairobi city center due to its bustle and good lighting. The whole street is lined with coaches parked, some of which are just arriving, while others are being cleaned for upcoming trips. In front of the sales stands of the bus companies, there's a lot of activity. The last tickets for the buses to Mombasa, Kampala, and Dar es Salaam are being sold. Next to the passengers, vendors try to sell snacks, street children beg for change, and at the edge of the action, there are sex workers offering their services in 20-minute sessions in the hotels nearby. The barber shops are illuminated with bright neon lights and serve their customers one after the other. The fast food restaurants are filled with people. While I continue walking, I smell pizza, fried fish, burgers, and fries. These smells of greasy food are mixed with gas and the scent of the morning rain. I notice a slight smell of aftershave from a man walking beside me. He's pushing me further and further away from the sidewalk, so that I must watch out not to be pressed against one of the metal grids that are placed to protect pedestrians from the road. Nobody pays attention to the people walking beside them. It seems that most people are alone, with their minds already at home, not willing to compromise. No time to let someone go first, and certainly not to make room for someone in spaces one has fought hard to win over. A young guy with huge white headphones on pushes me to the side and I almost fall. There's no time to complain because he disappeared so quickly that my "hey, be careful" is swallowed up by the hustle and bustle. He wouldn't have heard me anyway. This is exhausting. I feel annoyed, stressed, and I realize how I walk faster just to get out of this mess. Passing supermarkets, mobile phone shops, and video stores, I turn onto a street where everything slows down a bit. But that doesn't mean that there are fewer people on the road. At least I feel like I have a moment to breathe. This short phase, usually between 10 and 11, is the one in which day and night in Nairobi melt together. Everything becomes blurry. On the one hand, it is still noisy. Many shops are open. Most people are dressed in office clothes. On the other hand, a growing number of nocturnals are wandering around. I immediately notice them. They walk slowly, seem relaxed, and don't care about any of the chaos around them. For others, they probably just disappear within the urban rhythm, but I notice them. Just the fact that they are walking ahead of me instantly changes my mood. Have I felt upset before because of all the pushing and pulling? I can finally enjoy my walk again. Those who are in a hurry to get home are clearly recognizable. Wrapped in fleece jackets, some of which are pulled up to the face because it's starting to get a little chilly, they rush to the matatus with tired, slightly annoyed faces who gather their last energy to finally make their way home into the peaceful night, today even into the weekend. Street vendors are popping up, some with stalls made of old cardboard boxes, others with vendors' trays in which they offer their goods. On the sidewalks, everything is offered that the late-night shopper's heart could desire. Shoes, second-hand clothes, newspapers, plastic toys, jewelry and other accessories, cosmetics, sweets, nuts, tools, kitchen utensils, and, in the more remote streets, and if you know certain people, weapons and drugs. It is now almost 11 p.m., and all those who have family responsibilities or want to rest are on their way home. I turn into Banda Street, which at first seems completely inconspicuous. I need to be careful not to step into one of the many puddles. It smells like pee and burnt plastic, smoke and dirt. I notice how I hold my breath so that I don't inhale the smell. There's garbage everywhere, from beverage cans to plastic bags to leftovers of food that howling cats are fighting over. It stinks terribly, and I walk faster in order to escape it. Not even 2 minutes walking distance, a new world opens up, a club atmosphere on the open street with loud music. Many people are still in office clothes. Most of them talk in Sheng or Swahili, smoking cigarettes, sipping their beer bottles, laughing, relaxing, and letting go of the stress of the day. A bright green matatu sprayed with colorful graffiti was rebuilt and now serves as the DJ's workplace. Loud music, mainly Kenyan hip-hop, a buzz of people who gather here to drink 1, 2, or more beers, the so-called after-work drink. Amazing how close to each other the stinking remains of the day and the exciting activities of the night are in this case. I feel relieved. This looks far more inviting. Hour after hour, nocturnal Nairobi is now conquered by all those who want or must be awake until dawn, who dive into the second, more mysterious rhythm of the city. Wrapped in the sparkling neon lights reflected in the puddles of the morning rain and all the colors of the rainbow, Nairobi shines in new glory. The dim light of the street lamps paired with the flashing signs of the clubs and casinos, the flashing headlights of the passing cars. It is night, almost midnight to be exact, but it is not dark at all. Often at the beginning of a research night, I took walks like the one I just described. Sometimes I talked to people, sometimes I just walked a few rounds to tune myself in and make observations. Even though none of the people I spent my time with were mentioned, the example already shows some important facets of nocturnal atmospheres in Nairobi. There are no clear boundaries between day and night anymore. Although it is dark from 6:30 p.m., like the whole year round, some hours of daytime activities still happen at the same time nighttime activities start. Some shops, other businesses like transport and restaurants run 24/7, so there are hardly any differences. Others, such as street vendors or sex workers, are acquiring spaces to offer services that are mainly demanded by nocturnal people. This brings places like Banda Street to life at night, where young people have their after-work drinks. The facial expressions, but above all the differences in the way the city is traversed, show that nocturnal people bring more time and a certain calmness with them to the hectic city center of Nairobi. They stroll into the city while their counterparts rush out. It is these hours I described that show how day and night are inseparably connected and yet very different. The walk through the central business district is interesting because it brings together many aspects of atmospheres. On the one hand, the subjective mood, in this case my own, but on the other hand, also the external circumstances which influence the atmospheres. The described transition from day to night lets atmospheres develop, for example, the relaxation and the open bars. Again, others fade, for example, the stressed atmosphere as well as the busyness of the day. Secondly, many different atmospheres can be felt at the same time. It is possible to leave one atmosphere within a few steps and enter the next. Thirdly, the external factors changed my inner mood. The tiredness and feeling of annoyance of the people made me feel my own tiredness and undermined my motivation to spend another night out in the city. But when I heard then the conversations of the night revelers planning their activities for the night and the loud music from the clubs. I got excited again and curious about what the night still had to offer. Due to the multitude of impressions, smells, and noises, I didn't have to do much to feel the atmosphere myself. Rather, my openness and the flexibility to adapt my inner mood that night led to quick mood changes, so the different atmospheres infected me. The individual has to be open to such a large number of mood markers, in this case, groups of people, sounds of traffic, conversations and music, smells of food, animals, but also the scents of those who passed by, the change of light, the sparkling signs of the bars that were switched on. No specific inner attunement was required. So I have like very few concluding remarks. The discourse about the night in Nairobi in general is very much dominated by the dichotomy of fear and crime on the one side, and then ultimate freedom on the other side, as we also know this from like lots of literature on the night. So my idea is that by looking at atmospheres or nocturnal atmospheres, it is possible to overcome this dichotomy and show how there are many more ways to understand the night. And through this idea of nocturnal atmospheres, I think I'm able to illustrate how night in Nairobi is something deeply emotional for many people. And since atmospheres are experiences and they are perceived by people in my research context and myself, I chose a phenomenological approach in my work. And that means also including my own atmospheric experiences. And what I'm trying to do is compare them and contrast them with the ones of my research participants. And that is also the reason why I chose the empirical example today, where I walk with you through a Nairobi night. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Hanna. It's a very interesting presentation. Now we will try to
The title of my paper is The Other Night, Water and the Nocturnal Imagination on an Urban Night's Walk. Imagine, night falls, but sleep won't come, and for a long time you inhabit that strange liminal time between light and dark, between wakefulness and sleep. Perhaps, to persuade sleep to visit you, you try to imitate the god of sleep so convincingly that you almost become him, staying perfectly still, eyes closed, becoming, quote, an unseeing and almost unthinking mass, riveted to a point in space. This is how philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty described that effort of trying to get to sleep in the Phenomenology of Perception, 1945, at that liminal time at the edge of wakeful conscious thought, an edge that fascinated him and so many of his contemporaries. And here I want to explore the imaginative possibilities of that edge through their lens. Eventually, sleep descends and, accepting the usual tossing and turning of a night of sleep, your body is indeed riveted to a point in space. You are, quote, shut up in your immobility like an egg in a shell, end quote, as Emmanuel Levinas put it in Existence and Existence, 1978. This unsettling image contains within it a contrast I want to emphasize between the fixity of the sleeping body and the fluid potential of the sleeping mind as it floats free from the limits of the grounded body in dream. I need not set out for you the extent of the inventiveness and freedom the dreaming mind is capable of, and yet it cannot entirely shake itself free from the fixity of the body. Paul Valéry's story Agatha, left unfinished in 1903, illustrates the point. He imagined a woman falling into a sleep that lasted for years, and tried to imagine the gradual impoverishment of her dreams as their source material, the woman's waking life, was depleted over time. Lacking new input, as Valéry imagined, the dreaming mind can invent and invent and invent, but it must return again and again to the same cast of materials to draw upon. For new stimulus, it's dependent upon the rousing of the body, and with it the mind's reintegration into the waking world. So, if the dreaming mind floats free from the fixity of the sleeping body, in another way it remains bound to it, in a kind of tethered centrifugal movement, always in flight, but oriented to an unmoving point. Perhaps, when night falls, insomnia prevails instead, and you stay awake, mind circling, neither quite asleep nor dreaming, but neither quite awake. This space of restless nocturnal thought is described by Maurice Blanchot in 1989 as the other night, differentiating between that night that belongs to the sleeping body and the other night that belongs to the restless mind. The dreaming mind, he argues, both untethered and in flight from the body that tethers it, is not unlike the restless mind of the insomniac. In his discussion of the other night, Peter Schwenger emphasises, quote, the sheer difference of nighttime thinking from that of day. Citing Lois Nesbitt's 1988 work on critical insomnia, he makes the point that, like dream, insomniac thought is tethered and centrifugal too. Nesbitt writes that the insomniac might fix upon a particular object of scrutiny, but, quote, circles around his obsession, end quote, in such a way that, quote, the links between one idea and the next are often rather the leaps of associative thinking, metonymic slides from one track to another, such that one motion leads to another and another, end quote. Like the dreamer, the insomniac's path is thus circular, not linear, and, quote, his attention remains focused at the centre of that circle. Now, the question I want to address is, how does this conceptual framework allow for nocturnal thought, where the body is not fixed but rather moving, and moreover is moving through a wakeful nocturnal space where there's continuous new stimulus and interruption and opportunity for digression? What happens when the other night moves through the white night? Perhaps, when night comes and sleepiness descends, you're not in bed trying to get to sleep, nor even sitting up in bed trying to think, but outside, walking through the darkness with strangers who share your paths as they too walk home, tired from a day's work, or are still dawning for a night shift, or building up for a long night out, or insomniac and trying to coax the god of sleep to visit, or with nowhere to stay for the night, all sharing the same space and time, but many hidden time zones, hidden states of mind, hidden tracks of thought. Back in 2016, I made a series of audio recordings, sleepy and with a long walk ahead of me, from a temporary studio by a busy pedestrianised harbourside in Bristol, here in the UK, and this is a photograph I took at the time. The recordings began after a day made unproductive by a question I'd been unable to resolve. Perhaps, if I talked the problem through step by step, I thought, I could describe it from beginning to end, and it would start to make sense. I believe the decision to record my speech was taken quite lightly, that really I just wanted to talk to myself out loud, but with so many people around I felt self-conscious and held my phone to my ear as if in conversation. And with my phone to my ear I thought I might as well press record. I realised very quickly that there was something quite peculiar about the limits and possibilities of attempting to force insight in this way. Setting out to speak aloud in order to move towards a solution I didn't yet know where to find was a vertiginous undertaking. Had I been writing my thoughts on paper, I could have pinned them down and captured the development of ideas, or reread them to reorient myself. But here, walking and talking into the dark, the very urgent myopic attention to the present moment of thought, and the work it took to press the thought onward into the dark, meant that there seemed to be darkness or nothingness all around me, such that rather like the dreamer or the insomniac, my thoughts were always in flight, but always tethered to the single point I was occupying. Only the single point was not a sleeping static body, but a body in movement. I later discovered that the idea of beginning to speak before you know what you're going to say was explored by Heinrich von Kleist as a strategy for forging new thought in his 1951 essay on the gradual formation of thoughts during speech. He described how, when faced with a question he cannot resolve, he'll begin to speak aloud with some dark inkling of thought in his mind, quote, some obscure preconception, distantly connected in some way to whatever I'm looking for, end quote. And it's only by pressing on through the dark, lighting a path with words, that he might reach it. Setting out, beginning to speak with conviction, is enough to embolden his mind, he wrote, and oblige it to find an end to the beginning he set in motion, breaking new pathways through the unknown to forge new knowledge. The link between locomotion and perception, which Kleist hinted at, and which I experienced on the harbour side, was underlined by anthropologist Tim Ingold in his 2007 book, Lines, A Brief History, who could have been describing either my talking or my walking when he wrote, quote, proceeding on our way, things fall into and out of sight, as new vistas open up and others are closed off. Thus, the knowledge we have of our surroundings is forged in the very course of our moving along them, in the passage from place to place and the changing horizons along the way. End quote. Ingold is describing the kind of knowledge people use when they move through a terrain not by navigating, but by wayfaring, not by employing the all-seeing bird's-eye perspective of a map, but rather with one's course determined by perceptual clues picked up along the way. His distinction between navigating and wayfaring bears fruitful comparison to our distinction between diurnal and nocturnal thought. If diurnal thought is characterized by lucidity, clarity, rationality, and the all-seeing eye of reason foregrounded by the Enlightenment project, then nocturnal thought is something like its opposite, ungrounded, non-linear, obscure, and supporting the kind of knowledge that prevails in the absence of that all-seeing eye of reason, developing instead through tactility, groping forth into the unknown and locating oneself only by touch and immediate proximity. This is the kind of knowledge we find associated with the critique of oculocentrism put forward by strands of feminist and phenomenological thought in the late 20th century, but some of its roots are in the ancient Greek concept of metis, a form of tactical or working knowledge that was distinguished from the contemporaneous concept of the episteme, which today is tied to epistemological, lucid, rational and diurnal models of thought. Metis describes a kind of knowledge you need to negotiate contingent, shifting terrain, or to shift course in time with changing circumstances. In the Iliad, Metis describes the ability of the helmsman to guide his ship through stormy sea. Oppian uses Metis to describe the cunning of the fisherman, or of the frog who lures the fish towards himself and then strikes. Very much unlike the dreaming Agatha, whose stimulus continues to deplete because it circles around and around the same diminishing point. Where Metis comes into play, there is new stimulus all the time, and to negotiate it is to press forward into the darkness of uncertainty, without firm ground around you. Thus the concept of Metis and the images of the wayfarer, the helmsman, the fisher, describe the patterns of thought that emerge when the other night encounters the white night, when the centrifugally circling habits of the nocturnal mind encircle a point that is not riveted in space, but rather is moving, and is subject to a continual interruption by external stimuli. But it describes something else too, as we discover if we dive down into the water imagery that surrounds the concept of Metis. So far I've been discussing the experience of speaking into the dark, but I'd recorded the speaking too, and listening back to the quality of this speech offers further insight into the way that thought is affected by the specific circumstances of walking through the white night. When I listen back to these recordings, it's evident I was richly engaged with the connections that were emerging in time with my speech, but time and again, either I couldn't carry the thought all the way through, so it remained incomplete and disintegrated eventually, or the thought seemed to reach completion and maturity to my nocturnal mind, but not in a way that made any sense after the moment had passed, once listening back. Listening back, I can make no sense of what I was saying. For example, the air is all an ear, I had said, and then had made some work of sliding between the words oral and aerial several times by lightening and darkening their vowels until they sounded the same. Then, quote, I am a mouth, I am a mouth, I am a mouth, I mouthed, in an exploratory way, tongue shaping the sounds slowly and thoughtfully, pausing often as if to taste them. They're spoken as though the mouth and the mind are full with them. The pause is rich and moist. Something is being made here, some new discovery. But then I falter and the thing disintegrates, and only the words are left, repeated a few more times without feeling. The words sound ridiculous in my ear as I listen back. Nothing supports them. The pauses that must have been so rich and thick at the time are silent and empty as I listen back, and I cannot make sense of the thoughts. In many ways, this reminds me of the discoveries and revelations one makes in a dream, or even the treasures one finds and grasps in a dream which cannot be carried over into waking life. You always wake up with empty hands. Likewise, some of the insights native to nocturnal thoughts would seem to thrive only in the environment of nocturnal thoughts and cannot survive intact. And this is the point I want to conclude with. Time and again, the fascination with the liminal in modernist and phenomenological literature and the philosophy of the 20th century is described with allusions to water. The tactical or procedural knowledge of the helmsman and the fisherman both play out on the surface of the water, attentive to the shifting interactions of two irreconcilable domains, the air and the water, the light and the dark, wakefulness and dream. Virginia Woolf takes up the image of the fisher in a room of one's own when she offers an analogy between thinking and fishing. Quote, thought, to call it by a prouder name than it deserved, had let its line down into the stream. It swayed, minute after minute, hither and thither among the reflections and the weeds, letting the water lift it and sink it until, you know the little tug, the sudden conglomeration of an idea at the end of one's line, and the cautious hauling of it in, and the careful laying of it out, end quote. Crucially, once hauled in and carefully laid out, the importance and darting liveliness of the thing is lost. Woolf goes on, quote, alas, laid out on the grass, how small, how insignificant this thought of mine looked, end quote. Woolf's comparison of the mind in creative thought to an underwater environment joins thousands of years of myth and poetry that have established just this analogy. The trope of the night sea journey, for instance, sees heroes dive to the depths or journey out to the sea to seize some treasure from the deep. Biblical metaphors of water and flood that plunged all of creation into a languageless sea, and more recently the psychoanalytic ideas of oceanic thought that might also have contributed to such literary metaphors as Woolf's, that attempted to understand that thought can live in the night but not in the day. The alacrity, the metis of the fisherman might catch him his fish, but it cannot keep it alive once surfaced, just as that rich new discovery I was mouthing to myself in the dark sounds ridiculous in my ear when I listen back. I want to close with the question, if the darting liveliness native to nocturnal thought is lost in that liminal endeavour of bringing it up from the depths into the light of day, then how does it serve us, we who live up here in the light? The answer I want to propose, in short, is that perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps it doesn't serve the people we are here and now, but it does serve the people we are when we are asleep, or half asleep, or lying in bed mind swimming, or walking and talking in the dark. As the white night grows, there is a risk, I think, that we might see less of those nocturnal people whom we each can be. As daytime thought increasingly encroaches on nighttime thought, it can be difficult to appreciate the value of treasures that cannot make it over that liminal threshold from the other night into the white night. But they have value. Maurice Blanchot, who gave us our first description of the other night, makes this point in his reading of Orpheus's failed attempt to bring Eurydice back from the underworld. He failed to bring her across the threshold because at that very last moment he stopped, turned, and looked at her. This very action was enough to whisk her back down to the depths forever, and so he crossed his threshold on his own, empty-handed. But as Blanchot reads this is an account of creative thought. In the underworld of nocturnal thought there is inspiration to be found, but there is also a choice to be made. By his account, Orpheus was faced with a choice between briefly but brilliantly glimpsing the ungraspable, incommunicable, quote, profoundly dark point, end quote, of inspiration, even if that meant losing it forever thereafter, and on the other hand, the possibility of attempting to bring that ungraspable thing up to the surface, making the ungraspable into something graspable, hauling in that darting idea and laying it out on the grass, even if that means its essence is lost. Perhaps, as the white night extends its reach towards the other night, the imaginative possibilities at their intersection might lay bare new opportunity for slipping more readily under the surface of the imagination into nocturnal thought. And perhaps, as we imagine the infrastructures that might support the ever more diurnal night, we can take into account the prospect that we too have this choice to make. Thank you.